Okay, good evening. Can you hear me back there? Very good. So first, thank you so much for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be here with you, and a particular pleasure to discuss the issue of the relationship between Israel and the Jewish people and their future. I must say that this relationship has been one of the most steady things in my life. By now, in my advanced age, I can say that I have been in this field for 25 years now. And it started when I was 16, sent by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to a program that they have of young ambassadors. And this is the trip that started me on a lifelong journey of thinking and hopefully shaping the relationship between Israel and the Jewish people. At the time, I am the clear product of the mainstream, mamlachti, Israeli, secular, Zionist education system. And we were sent, my partner and I, to upstate New York. Mostly we were meeting with non-Jews so that they will learn that Israelis are wonderful and normal. But sometimes we would meet with Jews. And one such afternoon, we had a meeting in the Jewish community. And after we ended the presentation about Israel and youth in Israel, the time was for questions and answers. And one of the young people raised their hand asking the following question. Said, okay, we heard you, and now I want to know what is the best thing that we can do for Israel. So, being the person that I was at the time, I said, make Aliyah. And it became very quiet all of a sudden in the room. And the same brave soul raised his hand again and said, what is the second best thing that we can do for Israel? And this was a defining moment for me, because I had to understand what just happened there. Something that was so obvious to me, the clear and obvious answer to this question, was clearly not obvious to him. And this launched me on a journey of whether the kind of relationship that we have between us is appropriate for the current era and for the emerging generation of which I was part. Because if I were to caricature the contract as it stood, and to some extent still, but much less than in the past, the old contract from the Israeli perspective looked like this. A bit of caricature, not too much. Israel would go to the Jews and tell them, you have two options as far as we're concerned. You can make Aliyah, and then you're good Jews. Or, if you don't make Aliyah, give money, preferably a lot, and feel very guilty about not making Aliyah. Basically, a bit of a caricature, not too much, of the traditional contract and message that came from Israel to the Jewish world. And this kind of contract or relationship was also based on a whole host of assumptions that I could say that as an Israeli growing up in Jerusalem, felt more and more detached from my life. The notion that life in Israel was a life of hardship, of sacrifice. That, yes, we here in Israel are living this life of hardship and sacrifice, but we can feel superior to those living in the Golden Medina and enjoying their very comfortable lifestyles because we are realizing the Zionist dream and the true Jewish ideal. So a whole relationship that had a lot of judgmental elements into it, a lot of ambivalence. And I can say that growing up in Jerusalem, my life was not one of hardship, of difficulty, of sacrifice. It was quite wonderful. Your classic middle-class Jerusalem life of the 80s. And I remember thinking, okay, does this relationship even make sense anymore? After my service in the military. I left for the United States. I went for an undergraduate degree at Harvard. And unlike many Israelis, I decided very seriously to kind of immerse myself in understanding the Jewish community. I was very active in Hillel. I was an intern at AIPAC. Later, when I worked at McKinsey, I did a lot of pro bono work in strategy consulting for Jewish organizations in New York. And this really was a permanent issue in my life. I was on the consulting group to Birthright when it was started in the mid-90s. Later, when I came back to Israel, I was one of the founders and very involved in a group called Cold Door that really put the idea of peoplehood on the map and shaped it. And this has been a permanent issue in my life. And now I have the benefit of doing it from the Knesset and from the position of a chair of a subcommittee on the relationship between Israel and the Jewish people, and now even as the chair of the education committee. So if I presented the old contract in a bit of a caricature, how would I want the new contract to look like? And the new contract, I define it very simply. If under the old one we said all Jews should live in Israel, the emphasis on should, the notion now should be that Israel should be the first or second home of all Jews in the world. And when I say second home, I don't mean that you should all go and buy expensive real estate in Jerusalem. I mean that Israel should become a lifelong, meaningful relationship for each and every Jewish person. And the benefit is that today, with technology, with cheap communications, with cheap flights, this is something that we can give serious content to. And that is what I want to do going forward. How do we give more meat, as we say, into this notion of Israel as the second home of all Jews in the world? I continue to be a proponent. If Jews want to make Israel their first home, that's wonderful, and we need to give all the support to that. But in today's world, if we offer people 1 or 0, we will often get 0, too often. If we offer people a whole spectrum between 1 and 0, we will all benefit. Now, I will say that I'm not just looking at Israel from this perspective, I'm also looking at the Jewish world at large. Because in my view, when I say that all Jews should make Israel their first or second home, I think there's also benefit to Jews in Israel becoming much more familiar and at home in the Jewish world at large. Sometimes I think to myself that, today the Jewish people, about half of the Jewish people live in Israel, but it doesn't have to be the same half all the time. We can think of Israel as a place where people come in and out. Jews from around the world come here for short periods and extended periods. They have professional relationships here that matter to them, personal relationships here. And Israelis who live here go for certain periods abroad, immerse themselves in the Jewish community. I know that I was highly enriched by seeing the pluralism of Jewish life in the United States, in the UK, in France. You need to understand that growing up in Jerusalem, the first time that I met a Haredi person who went to college and planned to be a doctor and work for a living was in the United States. Think what this means for someone growing up in Jerusalem, where literally the concept of Jewish life was black and white. So I know that I was very enriched by seeing a much more pluralistic Jewish life, and this has had influence on Israel in recent years. We now have a remarkable renaissance here also regarding Jewish life. So I believe that Israelis can enrich themselves also by being abroad, but it should be in a way where they immerse themselves in the Jewish community and not stay away from it. Now, what are some of the practical things that should be in this new contract that will give meat to it? First of all, I will say Hebrew. Now, I didn't used to be a big proponent of Hebrew as a language of the Jewish people, the lingua franca of the Jewish people. I used to think everyone speaks English, that's good enough. But then I realized, first of all, that in order to make Israel your second home, knowing Hebrew helps. It makes a difference. The more you know the language of a country, the more you understand, the more you care, the more you can be a part of it. This means that we need to rethink how we teach Hebrew. It's one of the things I plan to take up in joint sessions of the Education Committee and the Subcommittee on Israel and the Jewish people. How can we have Hebrew learning that, for example, if you come to Israel for 2 weeks or 4 weeks, you can learn Hebrew. Children who are learning Hebrew in schools, how much better would it be if they knew that they would cap off learning Hebrew abroad if they would come here for a 6-week summer experience of Hebrew immersion? These programs can be both cheaper and more effective and help create a stronger relationship where Israel is truly the second home of all Jews in the world. I think we need to look at professional frameworks. If you're a teacher, make sure that there is a school where once in a while you come and you teach in the school. If you're a lawyer, if you're a doctor, maybe there's a hospital that you align yourself with, and once in a while you come here. Researchers, we need to begin to think about professional frameworks that allow Jews from around the world to contribute their skills, their knowledge into Israeli society. Twinning schools. There's a lot of wonderful initiatives, and now with technology, it costs nothing to have schools in Israel and schools abroad do classes together, events together. I've been exposed to some of these programs. It's remarkable. Recently, people showed me a program where kids in Israel did a tour of the Supreme Court. They walked with a camera, and children in schools in Ukraine and in New York saw this tour as the Israeli children were going through that tour. So twinning schools is something that we can do much more now. I have this idea, several people, that we should have something called a Friend of Israel passport, or call it a Jewish passport. A checklist that Jews from around the world can fill, and this will indicate that they are truly friends of Israel and have made Israel their second home. And the checklist will include visits and stays in Israel and learning Hebrew and being part of a professional network, and we can think of many other ideas in this sense. One thing that we discussed in my committee is an idea by a woman named Joelle Fiss. She took it from the European Union, where they have something called a citizens initiative, where in Europe it's 1 million people, but for the Jewish world I said it's 5,000 people. If 5,000 people from around the Jewish world will sign a petition to discuss an issue, I have committed to discussing this issue in my committee in the Israeli Knesset. This way we create also a closer political relationship and also send the message that within the Israeli Knesset, we want the voice of Jews from around the world to be heard and to be taken seriously and to be discussed. And another idea, of course, is often I call groups who are interested in advocacy for Israel to enlist in something that I call the IIDF. We have the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, but now we need the IIDF, the Israeli Intellectual Defense Forces, committed to the intellectual defense of Israel and Zionism in the battle that we're now in against those who seek to undermine Israel and the Zionist idea. And this is something that anyone can do from any place in the world to defend Israel in images, in ideas, intellectually. That's something that takes place everywhere in the world and gives meat to one's connection with Israel. And it could also be the beginning of a whole renaissance of education about Israel. And I see more and more of these groups coming to Israel, young people wanting to know more about Israel so that they can be better informed on their campuses, in their jobs, in their high schools. So these are some of the ideas, and I keep on discussing many of these ideas in my committee. So I will just end by saying that I think that we're now truly, thanks to technology, thanks to cheap flight, poised truly for a change in the relationship between Israel and the Jewish people. I'm sure you've noticed also that I don't even use the word diaspora. I don't even, and certainly not the word exile, which is one that was used previously. A relationship that is much more equal, round table, non-judgmental, but one where Israel is of critical importance to the relationship, because the relationship gets built through higher and through deeper and broader involvement with Israel. So I think we can today truly call for a new contract where Israel is the first or second home of all Jews in the world. And now I think our joint effort, wherever we work, in the community, in the Knesset, is to make sure that we give real meat and substance to the idea of Israel as the first or second home of all Jews in the world. Thank you very much.